Let's review a fight from the show Wheel of Time. The fight between Matt, Galad and Gawain, I think I'm pronouncing that right, with a quarterstaff versus two swords. Hi folks, Matt Easton here, Schola Gladiatoria. Now, amongst other things, I am a sword fighting instructor, so I don't know anything about Wheel of Time. I haven't read the books, I haven't watched the TV show, but I've been asked to review one of the fights from the TV show. That's right, I take requests, and Jeremy Almeida emailed me and pointed out a clip that was online. He said, hey Matt, I know you like fights like this, take a look at this, see what you make of it, I'm curious to know. So, I've gone and watched it and we're going to review it here. Just to reiterate, I know nothing about the books, the characters, the TV show, really at all. I might watch it at some point, but I do know about the use of quarterstaffs and swords, and I've been doing that for nearly 30 years. So let's look at this fight, and we're going to chop it up into little bits. If you want to see the full fight from beginning to end without me interrupting, then I'll put a link down below to where you can find it online, or you can watch it on Amazon Prime, of course.
Or what?
Oh, Matt.
You're not going to take two of us with a stick.
Well, so, you know, the first thing to stop right there and say is nobody who's an experienced martial artist or swordsman would underestimate the stick. The stick in this case is what we would call in English a quarterstaff. We don't know exactly why they're referred to as quarterstaffs. There's many theories about that. But the quarterstaff or staff is widely used in pretty much any culture that has sticks. And any culture that had swords and sticks very quickly realises that the quarterstaff is a good match for a sword, in fact. And going back to the 16th and 17th centuries, when we have treatises from European martial arts talking about different weapons against each other, and people will refer to sources like George Silver, for example, then you will time and time again find these historical masters who were au fait with all of the weapons of the time had an awful lot of respect for the stick, the quarterstaff, and in no way regarded it as a lesser weapon. In fact, many people claim that a quarterstaff man could hold at bay, in other words, sort of match or equal, 2 or even 3 swords people. Now, the main advantage that the staff has is its length, okay? It's length and leverage, so it's a two-handed weapon that you have a huge amount more reach than you do with a sword. Now, a lot of people I would say, overstate the importance of the staff. There is a reason that in martial arts and war and history, most people put a piece of metal on the end of that staff and turned it into a spear or a glaive or a halberd or a poleaxe or all of these more effective weapons. So pole arms with metallic heads on are more kind of useful and more potent than a simple stick. That's why people bothered putting things on the end of them. And indeed, something like a spear or a glaive dominates a sword out of armour. We're not dealing with armour here. That's a whole nother conversation. Okay, so I do find it irksome that swords people who are supposed to be experienced should underestimate the staff, because anybody that's done any amount of sparring would not underestimate a staff.
2 marks, says I could. Each.
This is ridiculous.
Well, no, I mean, you know, the staff man knows that in a game of tag, essentially, so in a sparring match, this isn't a real fight, it's not a real fight to the death. Then absolutely the staff has a huge advantage. The one thing I want to say is some staff people who only train this type of thing and don't look at the bigger historical context tend to overestimate the potency of the staff, because a hit in sparring is counted as a point. A hit is a hit. Whereas in reality, a hit with a sharp sword, and these presumably aren't sharp swords, a hit with a sharp sword could mean you're dead or going to hospital, whereas a person can take a hit from a stick many, many times and more or less be okay. That's why we use sticks in sparring. Anyway, let's carry on with the video.
You afraid?
So the answer is yes, they are a little bit afraid. So maybe they do, maybe his cockiness, maybe his arrogance is playing a part here, or maybe they do kind of go, well, actually, someone who knows what they're doing with the staff could actually be quite troublesome for us. But anyway, I don't know the background to these characters or this story. Once again, I don't know Wheel of Time. So if you do know it, fill in down below. Is there a reason why they're acting the way they are?
Done then. Let us put an end to this farce after all.
One little detail I noticed when looking at this, the swords, unfortunately, they're not terrible kind of props. We do see much worse props in some other shows and movies, but it is very evident that they are blunt. You can see big old fat blunt edges, and I suspect they are not made of metal. I think at most they might be aluminium or aluminum for American viewers, but I suspect that they're made of plastic or resin of some sort.
Todavía Andy se tovias again.
I have no idea what he just said there. I don't know what that means. Right, okay, so just at the outset here, they're holding their weapons back, which is actually quite typical of medieval and early Renaissance styles of swordsmanship. The system of holding the sword forward, well in front of the body, is something which comes a little bit later, becomes more common in the 17th century when more developed hand protection is more common on swords, with rapiers and later side swords and basket-hilted swords. So as hand protection becomes normal on swords, systems of fencing develop where you hold the hand more forward more of the time. With medieval swords where you've just got a crossguard, the hand is super vulnerable, so you tend to hold it back until the moment of striking or the moment of defending or thrusting. So I like that. That's kind of good. Although, one of the big advantages that swords people have against a person with a staff or a quarterstaff like this is the person with the staff has quite vulnerable hands. So they've got quite a lot of reach, but their hands, you can often get to the lead hand with the blade. And remember that unlike a hit on your fingers with a stick, which might just hurt or at most break a finger, a strike on the hand with a sharp blade from a sword might completely disable someone's hand. So hands are very vulnerable when you're using a staff against swords. I don't know whether he's praying to the stick. I don't know. Is there a god of sticks in Wheel of Time or something? I don't know. But maybe he's trying to look kind of, I don't know. Maybe he's trying to look like he's not that dangerous and he's trying to lure them in. It's difficult to say. I think he was doing a little bit of meditation there. I don't know. Right, resting the sword on the shoulder. If this was a sharp sword, you probably wouldn't want to rest it on the shoulder quite like that. It's not lightsaber, it's not going to cut through your shoulder or anything, but it wouldn't be comfortable. So this is indicative again of the fact that these are probably plastic or maybe aluminum props that are very, very blunt. Right, I'm just going to stop there. So he's essentially holding it in the middle and using both ends. Now, this is one of, it's not to say that you don't ever use staffs like this. You can do, and particularly in an enclosed space or against multiple opponents, which he is both of here. However, in case you don't know, this is not the conventional way of using a quarterstaff. A quarterstaff is usually held at the back, at the rear third of the weapon, with only a little bit behind. So it's held more like a big two-handed sword, which is what gives you the huge leverage and reach advantage. As soon as you hold the quarterstaff in the middle, you give up all of your reach advantages and a fair amount of leverage advantage as well. Both your hands, by doing this, like Star Wars Kid, become very, very vulnerable to sharp swords. So a far more sensible way of using this staff against two swordsmen is to hold the staff at the back end, use the long reach of it, and keep them at distance, whereby you can hit them, but they can't hit you. This is the whole advantage of polearms like spears. Giving up your reach advantage is really, really dumb, especially against swords when you don't have hand protection. Right, okay, I'm going to make one comment about blocking swords with a staff. Okay, so we've already mentioned the vulnerability of the hands. So one thing you've got to be super wary of is not getting hit in the hand. Because if you get hit in the hand, you're not going to be using your staff very well after that, because you'll have a chopped in half hand or maybe some fingers missing. Okay, so that's the first thing. The second thing is that, contrary to a blunt sword, actually a sharp sword is more likely to get stuck in the wood. Now, some people might think that a sword could just chop through a staff. In fact, many of us have experimented with this. And yes, you can chop through wooden shafts if you hit in the same spot several times, just like chopping down a small tree. Okay, so yeah, if you come in with an angle, you will chop into the wood, but it won't just chop straight through something like an oak or ash shaft. Okay, you can get through it with several blows, but they have to be in the same kind of area. So you can block a sword with a staff. However, one advantage that blocking a blade with a stick has is the blade momentarily actually sticks into the wood, which actually gives you quite a good bind, and that's not really represented here. But then we could say, well, maybe these are supposed to be blunt training swords, so they wouldn't be shown anyway. But anyway, I'm mentioning that in case you don't know. So, you know, I'm not going to criticize the twirling he's doing. Let's just go back a little bit actually and see this again. He's being quite twirly, but he's kind of showing off, isn't he? Look. Look at that. I mean, that's definitely showboating, but I don't have a problem with that. If you're confident against two opponents, remember that the fight isn't only about the physical act, it's about the psychology as well. And if you can dominate your opponents, you're going to make them more reluctant to attack, more nervous, more likely to back down, concede the fight, whatever. So psychologically dominating opponents is a very important element of any fight. It doesn't matter whether it's boxing or MMA or fencing or anything else. Just so you know, these sort of twirls that he's doing are not really, as far as we know, not very indigenous to European martial arts. That is, I would suspect that the choreographer has looked at a lot of Chinese martial arts, and some of these staff movements are clearly from wushu, kung fu, Chinese martial arts. So just before we go on with the fight, I'm going to mention one major advantage of a quarterstaff, which we don't see very much portrayed in TV or movies, and that is the use of the point or end. Okay, now, admittedly, it's not a spear; it doesn't have a pointy end. Although you can make the end of a wooden shaft, a wooden pole, sharp. You can have it tapered to a point, which would make it even more offensive. But even with the blunt end of a shaft, the strikes at most are going to concuss or break bones. Thrusts are really effective. Because a swing is usually somewhat easier to kind of parry, but thrusts can come in very quickly, directly, you can snooker cue them, so you can slide the weapon through the lead hand. They can strike incredibly fast and incredibly directly. Thrusts with quarterstaves, therefore, are super powerful. And we don't really see any thrusting here at all, not from the swords either. If this were a real fight, and I accept this isn't necessarily a real fight, at least as far as I can tell, thrusts to the face or to the chest or to the crotch or places like this, vulnerable spots, eyes, nose, this kind of thing, throat. Thrusts with a quarterstaff are hugely powerful, hugely potent and important. We should be seeing more thrusts in a typical fight. And in fact, keeping swordsmen at bay as well and protecting that lead hand from their sharp blades, you would expect to see more thrusts. Anyway, let's just go back a bit and see a bit more of this fight. There we go. So I'm just going to talk a little bit about spinning. There's a few spins in this fight. I don't have a fundamental problem with spinning, although spinning is usually overused in TV and movies. In this case, it's showing your back to the opponent. However, there are some techniques in martial arts where you do spin to generate power or even to avoid certain attacks. So spinning is not universally bad, it's just generally bad. There was actually a really interesting series of techniques there, which is quite brave of the choreographer to put in and quite accomplished actually by the actor, where the staff was actually used in one hand momentarily. Let's just go back and look at that again. It's quite interesting. Bear in mind I haven't seen this fight before, so let's go back a little bit further. There we go. Here we go, one-handed, switch, one-handed, and then back to two-handed. It's actually quite an impressive bit of choreography. I'm not going to say it makes an enormous amount of martial sense. However, there are certain techniques sometimes where to disengage your sword, and in fact there's a poleaxe technique where a person's going to throw you because they've got their weapon across your neck. This is an armoured fighting technique. And you actually let go with one hand and then grab it by the other end of the shaft. So you're holding this end of the shaft, you let go with that hand, turn it, and then grab this end of the shaft. So there is some historical precedent for this, in fact, and yeah, it looks pretty cool, and it gives a lot of variety to the fight. So I quite like that. Again, in terms of the strikes with the staff, really how much damage you do to someone with a stick. I mean, I'm sure everyone watching this this video has had sword fights with sticks as kids, possibly still now to this very day. When you hit someone with a stick, you can very much decide how much damage to do them, whether it's a big old quarterstaff or whether it's a shorter stick or a branch off a tree. When you hit someone, you know, you can hit them medium strength and it will hurt them. You can aim at a painful spot like their fingers or their nose and it will hurt them a bit more. And then you could kill someone with a stick. You could beat them to death with a stick, you know. So I do like the fact that he's using a stick which has a lot of leverage and a lot of power, but he's clearly not intending to, you know, completely end these people. He's controlling the force, which is eminently doable with sticks, and it's why sticks across the world, whether it's in Asia, Africa, Europe, North America, wherever, sticks have been used both as weapons but also as training weapons across history. Did I see a thrust in there? I want to go back and see if that was actually a thrust. Hold on, let's go back a bit. Well, yeah, there was only a hint, and it was a thrust as a feint. Now, that's a very good use of thrusts, actually. One of the so a feint is pretending to do one thing to create an opening to do something else. So say, for example, I thrust at you, you parry off to the side, so you move your weapon to one side to parry my thrust, which is actually not a thrust, and as you move your weapon to the side, it creates an opening on the other side, and I come around and hit you on the other side. This is absolutely typical fencing, martial arts 101, basic stuff, good. And thrusts are a very good thing to create openings with because they don't really expose you and they don't take much effort. You can easily just kind of jab, and if the opponent reacts to it, then you hit them somewhere else. So yeah, really good. Let's carry on with the fight. Right, side of the knee. Let's see that again. I like that. One of my favourite targets in sparring. There we go. Thrust, open up, bam. So that side of the knee, whether if you're using a bladed weapon, obviously it's the line to the junction at the side of the knee is very vulnerable, very easy to hurt. We've all of us who spar have been hit there at some point and really blooming hurts. But if you were using an edged weapon, obviously you've got the line to the hamstrings and the actual functionality of the knee. But if you're using a striking weapon, anything from a truncheon to a quarterstaff, a strike in the knee is much more effective than a strike in the front of the knee because you've got the patella or kneecap at the front of the knee, but the side of the knee is quite exposed, quite vulnerable, and it hurts a lot and can really affect a person's ability to fight. Let's carry on with the fight. So that spin was actually completely acceptable because he did the spin from out of distance. Now, for anyone who's not familiar with that concept, if you were just talking about a punching fight, for example, boom, boom, if I'm able to hit someone, I'm in distance. If I'm doing this and they're 6 feet away over there, I'm out of distance. It's exactly the same with weapons. Now, a weapon's in distance or out of distance is relative to the length of the weapon, unlike punching, which is just your arms. If you're out of distance, then charging up a blow with the spin and then coming into distance as you conclude the spin is perfectly acceptable, because during the spin, you weren't in distance to be hit. So it can generate more force. It can also confuse the opponent about where exactly that blow is coming in at, because as you do the spin, it's not yet coming in towards the person. And it's only as you finish the spin that you might do the spin and come high, or you might do the spin and come low. So you don't know where it's coming in. So yeah, really good. So one guy's been knocked out, and again, with sticks, this is one of the beauties of them. They've got like a power regulator. You can set them to stun. Set my quarterstaff to stun. Bump! There we go, stunned. Oh, I'm going to set my quarterstaff to kill now. Anyway, let's see what happens next. Yeah, I mean, they're well beaten, aren't they? So I didn't state this before, but the obvious of when you're holding a staff in the middle, you've got two ends. So it does mean that whereas a sword theoretically only has one end, and in fact you've got a pommel, you do have another end, but it doesn't have much reach on it. A pommel is obviously punching distance. With a quarterstaff, you've got the ability to project your reach with one end, and as they parry that, immediately come around with the other one. So you can overwhelm a swordsman, even essentially that half swording, holding it in the middle, attacking with both ends. But once again, this is 100% not what I would recommend you to do with a staff against a sword, because you will get wounded in the hands, okay? Being hit with the quarterstaff around here, so long as it's not the head, is gonna hurt. It might break some ribs. It's not gonna kill you. However, if you're the quarterstaff person and you're getting hit in the hands with the sharp blade of a sword, bad news, end of fight quite soon, okay? So generally speaking, it's better to hold the staff at a back end and use reach and keep your hands safe. When you come in close, you massively put the hands into danger. You also make it more difficult to deal with thrusts, for example. And there you go, that's pretty much the end of the fight. I do like the fact that he turned around to do a hit. Let's just see that last bit again, actually. Let's go back a bit. A little bit more. There we go. So he pushes him back. 1, 2. You see? So, and I liked that, and that is reminiscent of some techniques we see historically. There is in fact a technique where you come in with small sword, for example, to grapple someone, and you actually thrust them behind your back. So it's a little bit reminiscent of things like that. Anyway, we're going to finish up there. Were there some things I missed? I've never read the books. I've never even watched the series. This is the first time I've watched this fight today. How similar was this fight in the TV show to the books? Was it similar? Were there other details explained in the books? Were those swords supposed to be blunt? So some of the headlines for you to take away from this that I would like. Firstly, quarterstaffs, you normally hold them at one end and use their reach. Secondly, the big advantage of pole weapons, shafted weapons, is their reach. That's the big advantage they have over swords. Secondly, blunt swords and sharp swords don't react on wooden shafts in the same way, but nevertheless you can't really cut through a wooden shaft, but it does bind and lock into it, which can be an advantage for either side depending how it pans out. Finally, sticks. You can regulate them, you can set them to stun. One of the great things about sticks and why they're used as training weapons is because we can use them really quite safely. But of course, sticks can be used dangerously, and quarterstaffs are quite formidable weapons when used with a lot of martial intent. However, pole weapons with a metal head added, like a blade, like a glaive, for example, or a partisan, are even better, and that's why they were used in war, because of course they can punch through armour, they can chop things off, they can do some of the things a sword can do with the reach of the quarterstaff. Not to say quarterstaffs were never used in war, but for the most part they weren't. They were mostly a civilian weapon that isn't a weapon, because you just say it's just a stick. Anyway, the mighty stick, and this was actually a fun fight to watch. So thanks again for the recommendation. And any of the rest of you watching this, if you want to recommend any particular fights, it's always welcome. And this is part of a series. If you haven't seen my other movie and TV fight review series, then check out that playlist now. Thanks a lot for watching. I've been Matt Easton, and hopefully I'll continue to be, and I'll see you back on the channel really soon. Cheers, folks. Thanks for watching. We've got extra videos on Patreon. Please give our Facebook a like and subscribe if you haven't already. Cheers, folks.